They called it the Long Quiet, a name whispered with a reverence that bordered on the sacred, 1,000-year exhalation after millennia of fire and blood. Earth and its children had finally put away the sword, melting down the last warships to forge the orbital rings that now glittered in the sun like a promise kept. Humanity had turned inward, tending to its garden, healing the scars on its cradle world and the deeper wounds in its collective soul. Out among the stars, in the bustling forums of the Galactic Concord, we were a curiosity, a species that had tasted empire and spat it out, trading conquest for art and aggression for philosophy. They called us the gardeners, the keepers of the solitude, a race of gentle relics who had forgotten the savage grammar of the universe, the great powers, the crystalline Zill, the gaseous minds of the Cygnian Drift, the warrior clans of the Cathar Imperium. They saw our peace not as a strength, but as a symptom of decay, a terminal complacency. They watched our silent worlds and our slow-sailing solar yachts, and they wrote us off as a footnote, a failed experiment in cosmic significance, a people who had chosen the sunset over the dawn, but they had never understood the things that grow in the dark, the strength forged not in the clamor of battle, but in the suffocating weight of memory. On Archive Station Epsilon, suspended in the cold, black gulf between systems where the light of Sol was just another star, Anya Sharma lived with the ghosts of what her species had been. She was a curator, a keeper of the dead ledgers, the unfiltered, unedited history of humanity's violent adolescence. Her world was a silent library of data cores, each one a tombstone for an age of war. Each file a scream frozen in time. While the children on Earth learned of unity and the great harmony, Anya spent her days cataloging the brutal specifics of the Terran Wars, the Martian rebellions, the cold, calculating slaughter of the Outer Rim purges. She knew the names of forgotten warlords, the tactical schematics of planet crackers, the precise energy signatures of weapons that could turn a biosphere to glass. She was 47. Though she looked older, her face etched with the gravity of her work, her eyes holding a depth that unsettled the few visitors she ever received, her hands calloused from manipulating the ancient physical interfaces of the archive, were the hands of a laborer, not a scholar. In a galaxy that saw humanity as soft, Anya knew the truth was buried here, in the cold hum of the data vaults. A predator sleeping in the bones of a poet. The first whispers came from the Perseus Vale, a sparsely populated sector known for its rogue planets and stellar nurseries. A listening post. Delphi 7 went silent. The Soul Accord, the unified governing body of the human sphere, logged it as a micrometeorite swarm, a common enough hazard. A month later, the mining colony on Kepler 186f, a world of red grass and strange, six-limbed grazers, missed its scheduled report. Solar flare activity, the Accord communique stated, a temporary disruption of interstellar comms. But Anya saw the pattern. Cross-referencing the incidents with the dead ledgers, her fingers flew across the console, pulling up fragments from the Dark Age, a period of history so brutal it was sealed from public access. She found what she was looking for in a corrupted file detailing the fall of the progenitors, a mythical precursor race from whom humanity was rumored to have descended. The file spoke of an enemy that did not conquer with fire, but with sound, a foe called the Chorus, who came from the void between galaxies and sang worlds into silence. The energy signature preceding their arrival, A low-frequency resonance that warped space-time on a quantum level was a perfect match for the faint. Anomalous readings her deep space sensors had picked up from the locations of Delphi 7 and Kepler 186f just before they vanished. She sent her findings to the Accord Council on Luna, a carefully worded, professionally detached report complete with terabytes of supporting data from the ledgers. The reply was equally professional and utterly dismissive. Curator Sharma was thanked for her diligence, but reminded that her mandate was the preservation of the past, not alarmist speculation about the present. They suggested she take a leave of absence, citing the known psychological strain of deep space isolation. They saw a lonely woman in a library of nightmares, projecting ancient fears onto stellar phenomena. They didn't see the gathering storm. The storm came for the Triton Relay. It wasn't a fringe colony or a forgotten outpost. It was the primary communications hub for the entire outer sphere, a nexus through which trillions of bits of data flowed every second. When it went silent, it was like a major artery in the human body had been severed. This, the Accord could not ignore. They dispatched the Peacekeeper fleet, a collection of 7 ships that were more symbols of authority than instruments of war. Their primary armaments were powerful tractor beams and EMP cannons designed for disabling pirates and rogue freighters, not for sustained combat. Leading the fleet from the bridge of the UNS Vigilance was Commander Jorik Tarn, a man who had earned his position through diplomacy and strategic acumen in simulated war games. He was young, idealistic, and a firm believer in the new human way. He saw the mission as a rescue operation, a chance to prove that even in the darkest corners of space, humanity's light of reason prevailed. As the Vigilance prepared to jump, a Priority 1 encrypted message bypassed normal channels and appeared on Tarn's private console. It was from Archive Station Epsilon. The message was short, a single line of text followed by a data packet. They do not want to talk. They want you to listen. Do not engage. Observe and retreat. The data packet contained a single audio file, a recording reconstructed from the energy signature Anya had detected. Tarn played it. The sound filled the bridge, a low, impossibly complex chord that seemed to vibrate not in the air, but in the bones of his skull. It was beautiful and deeply, fundamentally wrong. A melody that felt like a key turning in a lock deep inside his mind. He dismissed it as a psychological tactic, a bit of theater from whatever renegades had seized the relay. But a seed of unease was planted. The 7 ships of the Peacekeeper fleet dropped out of warp space into a vision of alien artistry and horror. The Triton Relay was still there, but it was transfigured, encased in a massive, crystalline lattice that pulsed with a soft, internal light. The structure grew from the station like a cancer made of diamond and song, its facets catching the light of the distant star in a dazzling, silent display. There were no signs of battle, no debris fields, no distress calls. There was only the station, entombed and transformed, and a profound, unnerving silence. Scan the structure, Tarn ordered, his voice tight. Life signs. The sensor technician shook his head, his face pale. None. Commander. No human biosigns. No power signatures from the station's core. But the structure itself, it's resonating. The energy readings are off the scale. A coherent, patterned wave. Before Tarn could process the information, the wave hit them. It wasn't a weapon in any conventional sense. There was no explosion, No impact. It was the sound from Anya's file, amplified 1,000 times, a symphony of psychic pressure that washed over the fleet. The shields of the vigilance flickered and died, not overloaded, but simply harmonized into inertness. Alarms shrieked across the bridge as systems failed in cascading irrelevance. On the main view screen, the crystalline structure pulsed, and Tarn saw movement within its translucent depths. The faint, ghost-like outlines of the station's 5,000 crew members, their bodies fused into the lattice, their faces frozen in expressions of ecstatic terror. They were the choir. The sound intensified, and the minds of Tarn's crew began to unravel. Men and women screamed, clawing at their temples as forgotten fears and secret shames were dredged up and played back to them in a deafening mental loop. The communications officer began reciting binary code, tears streaming down her face. The helmsman simply curled into a ball, whispering the name of a childhood pet. Tarn felt it too, a seductive pull to simply let go, to join the perfect, silent harmony, to surrender the messy, painful burden of individuality. His own memories assaulted him, the face of his estranged father, the shame of a failed training exercise, every doubt he'd ever had about himself. He fought it, focusing on the one thing that felt real, the one voice of warning that had cut through the complacency of his world. Anya Sharma. With his last ounce of will, he crawled to the emergency comms panel, bypassing the fried systems for a direct, hard-line broadcast. He activated the ship's black box, aiming its tight beam transmitter at the last known coordinates of Archive Station Epsilon. He didn't have time for a report, no time for explanations. He only had time for 2 words, a message for the lonely woman who had tried to warn them, a confirmation and a plea. They're singing, he choked out, as the beautiful, terrible music filled his mind and the light from the crystal enveloped his ship, pulling it into the silent, perfect embrace of the chorus. On Epsilon, the 2 words arrived on a burst of static, the last testament of the Peacekeeper fleet. Anya Sharma listened to the recording, her face a mask of stone, the faint echo of the chorus's song dying in her ears. She closed her eyes, not in prayer, but in grim acceptance. The dead ledgers were open. The ghosts were stirring. The long quiet was over, and the galaxy was about to learn that the gardeners were the descendants of wolves, and they had not forgotten how to howl. Anya knew that humanity's only chance for survival now rested not in the gleaming halls of the Soul Accord, but here, in the cold, dark tomb of its own forgotten fury. And she, the quiet librarian, would have to be the one to turn the page. The message from the UNS Vigilance was not a scream, but a whisper, and that was infinitely more terrifying. It sliced through the cold, sterile silence of Archive Station Epsilon. 2 words carried on a dying breath of quantum-entangled energy. They're singing. Anya Sharma stood before the central console, the recording playing on a soundless loop, the waveform a jagged, near final heartbeat on the screen. The black box data that followed was a chaotic flood of corrupted sensor logs, fragmented biometric readings showing synaptic failure across the entire crew, and at its heart, a clean, pristine recording of the chorus's song. It was the sound of oblivion, a melody that promised unity at the price of self. It was the sonic signature of a species-level extinction event. For a full minute, Anya did nothing, her mind a perfect, cold vacuum. The Soul Accord had dismissed her. They had lost 7 ships and over 30,000 souls because they had chosen to believe the universe was as gentle as they had become. Sending them this new data through official channels would be a waste of precious time. It would be buried in committee, debated by diplomats, and analyzed by xenosociologists until the chorus stood at the gates of Luna. The age of asking for permission was over. With a series of precise, deliberate keystrokes, Anya bypassed her station's protocols. She compiled a new data packet, Tarn's final words, the full, unedited recording of the chorus's song, her own initial report, and a single, damning file from the Dead Ledgers, a tactical simulation from the Dark Age titled Resonance Cascade Failure, which modeled the complete collapse of a civilization's psychic cohesion when exposed to a hostile mimetic agent. She appended no commentary, no plea for help, no personal signature. She simply attached the packet to the core protocol of every active comms relay in human space and hit send. It was an act of informational treason, a violation of a dozen Accord statutes. She had just screamed fire in the serene, crowded theater of human consciousness. Within the hour, the universe answered back, on Luna. In the pristine, white marble amphitheater of the Accord Council, chaos erupted. The data packet had materialized on every public and private terminal simultaneously, from the desk of the Prime Counselor to the news feeds of civilian colonists on Mars. The raw audio of the chorus's song, though shielded by safety protocols, caused a wave of palpable dread to sweep the chamber. Counselors, men and women who had built careers on negotiation and compromise, stared at the casualty projections from Anya's simulated file, their faces bloodless. The official narrative, a catastrophic systems failure. A new stellar phenomenon crumbled in minutes. Prime Counselor Valerius, a man whose face was known for its placid, reassuring calm, struggled to maintain order. This is an act of terror, he declared, his voice strained. A sophisticated psychological attack using falsified data to incite panic. The curator of Archive Station Epsilon has been compromised. Her systems used to spread this virus of fear. But the lie was too thin to cover the chasm of truth that had opened before them. Counselor Ava Rostova, a sharp, pragmatic woman who represented the industrial guilds of the Belt, rose to her feet, and the 30,000 crew members of the Peacekeeper fleet. Counselor, are they also a falsification? Is the silence from the entire Triton sector a sophisticated illusion? She held up her datapad, displaying the frantic, incoming reports. The shipping lanes are dark. The automated buoys are offline. 30,000 people are gone. Valerius. And this virus of fear is the only explanation we have. The council fractured, devolving into factions of denial, panic, and grim accusation. They were a body designed to manage peace, to debate resource allocation and cultural exchange. They were a board of gardeners arguing over the proper response to a supernova. As the politicians debated, Anya was already at war. She plunged deeper into the dead ledgers than ever before, past the archives of humanity's own conflicts, into the corrupted, fragmentary data that predated the long quiet. Seeking the source of the file on the progenitors, she navigated a labyrinth of firewalls and data rot, the digital equivalent of hacking through jungle vines with a machete. The archives of this era were not neatly cataloged. They were a chaotic mess of half-truths, myths, and encrypted military secrets, a testament to an age when information was a weapon to be hoarded. She found what she was looking for in a sealed vault labeled Project Chimera. It was a military research initiative from the final, desperate days of the progenitor war against the chorus. The progenitors, ancient and wise, had realized they could not outsing the chorus, nor could they shatter it with force. The chorus was not a conventional enemy. It was a fundamental constant of the void, a form of life that operated on principles of resonance and psychic harmony. To fight it was like trying to punch a hurricane. So they had devised another way. Not a sword, but a shield. Project Chimera was not a weapon system. It was a neurocognitive framework, a way to rewire the human or progenitor mind to perceive the chorus's song not as an all-consuming truth, but as meaningless noise. It was a forced solipsism, a deliberate cultivation of psychic deafness. The process was brutal. It involved interfacing the subject with a quantum resonance chamber, a piece of technology that hadn't been in active use for 1,500 years, and flooding their consciousness with a counterfrequency, a discordant, chaotic anti-song generated from a live human mind. This null hymn would shatter the invasive harmony of the chorus, but the psychological cost to the subject, the conductor, was immense. The files were incomplete, the schematics for the resonance chamber corrupted, but the core theory was there, a ghost of a chance in a sea of certain doom. The most critical component, however, was the conductor. The file specified that the conductor could not be just anyone. They needed a mind that was already disciplined, already familiar with chaos. Someone whose mental landscape was not a serene garden, but a fortress built on a fault line. They needed a warrior's mind, a type of consciousness the long quiet had tried to breed into extinction. Anya knew there was only one place left in human space where such minds, and the old hardware to forge them, might still exist. Far out in the darkness of the Oort cloud, past the last of the gas giants, drifted the shield fleet. It was the forgotten fist of humanity, a collection of 200 automated defense platforms and a single, ancient command vessel. The dreadnought Iron Resolve. The fleet had been a compromise during the disarmament treaties a millennium ago, a final, vestigial line of defense against a threat no one believed would ever come. Its platforms were powered down, its weapon systems in deep cryostasis. It was a museum of war, and its curator was General Kalen Rex. Rex was a relic, a man carved from granite and cynicism. His family had served in Earth's militaries for 20 generations, a lineage that had become a source of shame in the new era of peace. He was given command of the Shield Fleet, not as an honor, but as a quiet exile, a place to put the old dog who still barked at shadows. He and his skeleton crew of a few hundred other misfits descendants of old military families, historical purists, and quiet paranoiacs spend their days running maintenance checks on weapons they were forbidden to fire and studying battle tactics for wars that would never be fought. He was on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, a cavern of dark metal and cold, glowing consoles. When Anya's broadcast arrived, he watched the report from Luna, the panic of the counselors, with a grim, humorless smile. He played the audio of the chorus, and, unlike the politicians, he felt no fear, only a cold, familiar clarity. It was the sound of an enemy, pure and simple. An hour later, a direct, encrypted signal pierced the calm silence of the Oort cloud, addressed to him personally. It was from Archive Station Epsilon. General Rex. The woman's voice was calm, steady, devoid of panic. You are in command of the only deep space vessels in the Sol system equipped with pre-Accord Mark IV quantum resonance chambers. I have the theoretical framework for a countermeasure against the entity that destroyed the Peacekeeper fleet. The framework is designated Project Chimera. It requires your hardware, and it requires your soldiers. I am transmitting the schematics now. Kalen Rex looked at the incoming data. The alien, complex diagrams of the Chimera framework filling his main screen. He saw the impossible requirements, the archaic technology, the immense risk. He saw the name of a project buried in the deepest, blackest archives of military history. He looked out at the silent, sleeping defense platforms under his command, each one a steel titan dreaming of fire. They had called him a watchdog, a fossil, a paranoid old fool staring into the dark. But the dark had finally stared back. He keyed his comms, his voice a low gravel that echoed in the metallic silence of the bridge. "Curator Sharma," he said, the words tasting of rust and vindication. "Power up your station's long-range shuttle. I'm sending you a pilot and a security detail. Welcome to the war." The long quiet was a beautiful idea, but it was over. Now came the time for ugly necessities, for the forging of monsters to fight the monsters in the dark. The librarian and the soldier, two ghosts from humanity's past, were about to drag their species, kicking and screaming, into the future. The journey to the Oort cloud was a descent into profound and absolute emptiness. Anya Sharma's shuttle, a blunt, graceless military transport named the Styx, was a relic of a bygone era, all function and no comfort. It moved through the void, not with the silent elegance of Accord vessels, but with the shuddering, groaning determination of old machinery pushed to its limits. Her escort, a grim-faced sergeant named Marcus Thorne, had said fewer than 10 words since they left Epsilon Station. He sat across from her in the cramped cabin, cleaning a pulse rifle that was technically an illegal antique, his movements economical and precise. He was a living piece of the archive she curated, a man whose entire being was an echo of a more violent time. He was not hostile, merely contained, his presence a constant, quiet reminder that she had crossed a threshold into a world that did not deal in theories. When the Styx finally docked with the UNS Iron Resolve, the sensation was like a coffin being nailed shut. The clang of the magnetic clamps reverberated through the hull, a sound of grim finality. The Iron Resolve was not a ship, it was a scar, a kilometer-long spine of dark, pitted metal. It smelled of ozone, stressed wiring, and the faint, metallic tang of recycled air breathed by too many generations of lonely men and women. The corridors were dimly lit, the walls bare save for conduits and damage control schematics. There were no art displays, no holographic vistas of verdant earth. This was a place built for a single, ugly purpose, and it had been waiting 1,000 years to fulfill it. General Kalen Rex met her in the primary briefing room, a tiered amphitheater of cold steel and flickering consoles that he used as his command bridge. He was exactly as she had pictured, tall, gaunt, with a face that looked like it had been carved from asteroid rock. His gray uniform was immaculate but worn, the fabric thin at the elbows. He moved with a stiff, formal economy. A man who had forgotten how to be anything other than a commander. "Curator Sharma," he said, his voice a low rumble. He did not offer a hand. "You've brought the ghost of a plan. I have the iron to give it form. Show me. There were no pleasantries, no debates on the morality of their actions. The time for that was a ghost, lost with the crew of the Vigilance. Anya projected the Chimera schematics onto the main holotable, the image of the quantum resonance chamber, a nightmarish web of conduits and focusing lenses centered on a single, throne-like chair, shimmered in the dark room. Project Chimera is not a weapon, Anya began, her voice crisp and clear, cutting through the low hum of the ship's life support. It is a broadcast. The chorus functions by synchronizing consciousness, forcing all minds into a single, devastating harmony. Chimera is designed to create a counter-broadcast, a null hymn of pure psychic chaos. This hymn doesn't fight the chorus. It makes it impossible for its song to find purchase in the human mind. It turns our consciousness from a resonant bell into a fistful of sand. She pointed to the chair at the heart of the schematic. To do that, it requires a conductor, a human mind to act as the source of the broadcast. The chamber will amplify their neural patterns, their very consciousness, into the null hymn. The conductor will become a living shield, a psychic firewall for the entire human race. Rex stared at the glowing chair, his expression unreadable. What is the cost to this? Conductor, a young officer in the back, Lieutenant Jan, a man whose face was still filled with the unscarred zeal of a true believer, answered before Anya could. It is the highest honor, General, to offer one's mind in service to all of humanity. Anya's gaze fell on him, cold and sharp. The cost. Lieutenant, she said, her voice dropping, is sanity. The conductor must open their mind to the chorus, allow its song to enter, and then, from the depths of their own being, generate a signal of such profound chaos and discordance that it shatters that harmony. The progenitor files are fragmented, but they are clear. On one point, the psychological strain is unsurvivable. The conductor's mind will not just be a shield, it will be the battlefield, the weapon, and the first casualty. Silence descended on the briefing room. The romantic notion of noble sacrifice evaporated, replaced by the cold, clinical horror of the procedure. Rex's eyes never left the schematic. We have 3 resonance chambers aboard this ship, salvaged from the old progenitor dreadnoughts found adrift near Alpha Centauri. They are antiques, but my engineers have kept them functional. He turned to his assembled officers, his voice hard as iron. Project Chimera is now the sole directive of the Shield Fleet. I am asking for volunteers. 24 men and women stepped forward. They were the children of the old military clans, raised on stories of glory and sacrifice, their minds honed by a lifetime of discipline and mental fortitude drills. They saw this as the culmination of their long watch, the test for which they had been born. Anya and Rex's medical team ran the diagnostics, searching for the candidate with the strongest psychic resilience and the most ordered, disciplined mind. The choice fell on Lieutenant Jian. His psych profile was a perfect lattice of discipline, loyalty, and unwavering mental control. He was, by every metric of the long quiet, the ideal human mind. He was a fortress. The resonance chamber was housed in the ship's deepest core, a spherical room shielded by meters of lead and composite armor. The chair sat on a raised dais, a throne of wires and cold metal, humming with latent power. Jian walked to it with a steady, determined stride, his face calm. He believed he was ready. He laid back in the chair as the medical team attached the neurolinks to his temples and the base of his skull. In the shielded observation room, Anya stood beside Rex, her hands resting on the control console. Initializing sequence, she said, her voice steady. Introducing the hostile signal at 1% amplitude. On the monitor displaying Jian's neural activity. A single, pure sine wave appeared the chorus's song, faint and clean. Jian's brainwaves, a complex but orderly pattern, flickered in response. He's resisting, the chief medical officer said. His mental discipline is holding. He's treating it like a hostile intrusion. Increase amplitude to 5%. Anya ordered. The sine wave grew, and Jian's neural patterns began to shift, the lines wavering. He was fighting it, his training holding, but the strain was visible. A single bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Now, Anya said, her voice tight. Initiate the null him protocol. Command him to generate the chaotic counter frequency. A new set of instructions flowed into Jian's mind through the neurolinks. On the screen, a new pattern was supposed to emerge, a chaotic, unpredictable scribble of pure mental noise, but it didn't. Instead, Jian's orderly brainwaves began to align with the chorus's sine wave. The patterns merged, synced, harmonized. His disciplined mind, his fortress of control, had no concept of the true, deep chaos required to fight the song. It saw only a perfect, overwhelming pattern, and his every instinct was to understand and master it. But this was a pattern that could not be mastered. It could only be joined. "What's happening?" Rex demanded. "He's not fighting it," Anya whispered, her eyes wide with horror. "He's learning it. His discipline is acting as a conduit." On the screen, Jian's brainwaves became a perfect, beautiful replica of the chorus's signal. Alarms blared as the resonance chamber began to overload, the energy feedback looping back into the ship's systems, from inside the chamber through the thick, shielded walls. They heard it. A single, pure, high note. Jian was singing. "Shut it down." Rex roared. "Shut it down now." Anya slammed her hand on the emergency purge, and the chamber flooded with dampening energy. The note cut off. They pulled him from the chair. His body was limp, his face utterly serene. His eyes were open, staring at something far away. A faint, beatific smile on his lips. He was alive. But Jian was gone. His mind was a perfect, silent echo of the song. A placid lake where a fortress had once stood. He was the first casualty, a victim not of the enemy's strength, but of his own. That evening, Anya sat alone in the archive lab she'd established on the Iron Resolve, the failed test data scrolling endlessly on her screen. They had been wrong. They had looked for the strongest mind, the most ordered mind, when the progenitor files had said something else entirely. She pulled up the specific, corrupted phrase again. The conductor must be a mind acquainted with the abyss, a consciousness forged in the crucible of. The rest of the phrase was lost to data decay. Not discipline, not order, acquainted with the abyss. A mind that knew chaos not as an enemy to be fought, but as a place to live. She ran a diagnostic, not on the volunteers, but on the entire crew manifest, cross-referencing psychological profiles with service records, looking for any sign of instability, trauma, or deep-seated cognitive dissonance. She found nothing. The SHIELD fleet was a crew of true believers, their minds too clean, too whole. Frustrated, she ran one final search, pulling up the profile of the only civilian specialist currently aboard the Iron Resolve. The data scrolled onto the screen. Sharma. Anya. Curator. Grade 5. Service record, 27 years. Archive Station Epsilon. Psychological evaluation subject displays symptoms consistent with prolonged deep space isolation, chronic exposure to traumatic historical data, and a profound sense of existential detachment. Mind exhibits a highly structured but fundamentally chaotic internal landscape, a library of nightmares, a carefully cataloged abyss. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked at Jian's serene, empty brainwaves on one screen and her own complex, jagged, chaotic patterns on the other. It had been there all along. The project didn't need a soldier to stand against the storm. It needed someone who was already the storm. She stood up and walked toward the command bridge, her steps heavy. She knew what she had to do. The librarian had to become the book. The ghost had to haunt the machine. General Kalen Rex was standing before the main view screen on the bridge of the Iron Resolve when Anya arrived. The starfield was a cold, indifferent tapestry, the same view he'd had for 20 years. But now it felt different, charged with a malevolent presence. He didn't turn as she approached, his reflection a faint ghost on the armored glass. "Lieutenant Jian is stable," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The medics say his vital signs are normal. He just isn't there anymore. He's a shell, a beautiful, empty shell." He finally turned, his eyes boring into hers. "Your plan failed. Curator. It turned one of my best men into a casualty before the first shot has even been fired. Give me a reason why I shouldn't put you on the first transport back to whatever rock you crawled out from under." Anya didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her own eyes reflecting the cold starlight from the view screen. The plan didn't fail. The candidate did. "We were looking for the wrong kind of strength. We chose a mind built of straight lines and right angles to fight an enemy that is a wave. We tried to build a dam when we needed to become a countercurrent." She held up her data pad, displaying her own psychological profile next to Jian's. His mind was a fortress. It was designed to repel intruders, to maintain its own structure at all costs. When the chorus came, a force too great to repel, his only remaining option was to harmonize with it. He surrendered to its logic. "My mind." She tapped her own profile. The chaotic, jagged lines of her neural activity, a stark contrast to Jian's former neatness, is not a fortress. It's a labyrinth. It's a library filled with the screams of a billion dead souls. Chaos is not an intruder in my mind. General, it's the architecture. Rex stared at the two profiles, the cold, hard logic of her words cutting through his anger. He saw it now, the flaw in their thinking, the arrogance of believing that their meticulously cultivated discipline was the ultimate form of strength. They had trained their soldiers to be unbreakable, but the chorus didn't try to break you. It tried to tune you. "What are you proposing?" he asked, his voice low. "That you were the intended conductor all along, I am proposing," Anya said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "That the progenitor who wrote that file wasn't looking for a soldier. They were looking for a historian. Someone who has stared into the abyss of what a species is capable of, who has cataloged every failure, every atrocity, every moment of cosmic horror, and has not gone mad. Someone who can hold all that chaos, all that noise, and not just endure it, but weaponize it." A heavy silence settled over the bridge. The handful of officers still on duty turned from their consoles, listening. This was no longer a tactical discussion. It was something far more primal. "You would volunteer for this?" Rex finally asked. After seeing what it did to Jian, what it did to Jian was erase him with perfection. Anya countered. "I'm betting that my imperfections are a stronger shield." The preparations for the second attempt were different. There was no sense of ceremony, no talk of honor. The atmosphere in the core chamber was thick with a grim, surgical tension. Anya walked to the resonance chair herself, refusing the assistance of the medical team. She wore a simple gray jumpsuit, her dark hair pulled back from her face. She looked not like a soldier marching to her fate, but like a scholar preparing for the ultimate, final experiment. As they attached the neurolinks, her eyes met Rex's through the observation window. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a gesture of reassurance, but of acknowledgement. They were two relics, two custodians of a forgotten age, about to unleash a ghost to fight a song. She lay back in the cold metal chair, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. She did not try to clear her mind or fortify her thoughts. Instead, she opened the doors. She let the dead ledgers flood her consciousness. The firebombing of Dresden, the glassing of Meridian Fur, the silent, floating corpses of the Void Plague, the screams of children in the genetic purges, warlords, tyrants, famines, and betrayals. 1,000 years of peace built on a foundation of 10,000 years of savagery. She immersed herself in the cacophony of human history, the ultimate monument to chaos. "Begin," she said, her voice calm. Broadcast into the observation room. Introducing the hostile signal, Rex ordered, his voice tight. On the monitor, the pure sine wave of the chorus appeared again. Anya felt it in her mind, not as an attack, but as a seductive whisper. It was a promise of an end to pain, an end to memory. A perfect, clean silence where her library of horrors had been. It was beautiful, and it was the most terrifying thing she had ever encountered. It began to smooth the jagged edges of her thoughts, to quiet the screams of the dead. For a moment, she felt herself slipping, the lure of that perfect harmony almost overwhelming. She saw Jian's beatific, empty smile. No. With a surge of will, she focused not on resisting the song, but on embracing her own chaos. She dragged the worst of it to the forefront of her mind, the image of a single, starving child from the collapse of old Earth, his eyes wide and hollow, the sound of a dying starship's hull groaning under pressure, the last, desperate transmission of a colony succumbing to a nanite swarm, dissolving into gray goo. She took all the pain, all the ugliness, all the imperfect, screaming chaos of being human, and she held it up against the chorus's perfect note. "Initiate the null hymn protocol," Rex commanded. The instructions flowed into Anya's mind, but this time they were not a command to be followed, but a key unlocking a cage. The resonance chamber roared to life, feeding on the maelstrom in her consciousness. On the monitor, a new waveform erupted. It was not a wave, it was a shriek, a jagged, unpredictable, violent scribble of pure psychic static. It was the sound of every nightmare humanity had ever had, weaponized and broadcast. The sine wave of the chorus wavered, distorted, and then shattered against the wall of noise. From the observation room, they could hear nothing, but they could see the effects. The lights in the chamber flickered. The monitor displaying Anya's vital signs went haywire, her heart rate and neural activity spiking to impossible levels. It looked like she was having a seizure, her body convulsing in the chair. "Is it working?" Thorn asked, his knuckles white where he gripped his rifle. "Or is it killing her both?" Rex breathed, his eyes glued to the main display. The chaotic waveform of the null hymn was stabilizing, growing stronger, a roaring, untamed fire of pure consciousness. Inside her mind, Anya was no longer in the chair. She was adrift in an ocean of noise. The chorus was still there, a persistent, whining hum at the edge of her perception, but it could no longer find purchase. Her own chaos was too loud, too vast. She felt the resonance chamber amplifying her thoughts, her memories, her very being, spreading out from the iron resolve like a shockwave. She was becoming the broadcast. She was the shield. She pushed further, pouring more of the dead ledgers into the fire. She became the rage of a betrayed army, the despair of a dying world, the cold, calculating logic of a genocide. She felt her own identity, the librarian Anya Sharma, begin to fray at the edges, dissolving into the storm she was creating. This was the cost. Not a clean death, not a quiet erasure, but a slow, conscious unraveling. She was becoming a concept, a living monument to human suffering across the Sol system. The effect was instantaneous. On Luna, the faint, residual psychic pressure that had lingered since the first broadcast, a low thrum of anxiety and dread that had settled over the population, vanished. It was like a soundproof wall had been slammed down. In the Accord Council chamber, the debate faltered as a wave of profound, unnerving silence filled the room. A silence that was not peaceful, but empty. On Mars, colonists reported a sudden, inexplicable feeling of clarity, as if a low-grade fever they didn't know they had had suddenly broken. The null hymn was working. It was a shield of pure static, making the human mind anathema to the chorus. But the shield had to be maintained. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, a new report flashed onto the tactical screen. A long-range sensor probe, positioned near the edge of the Kuiper Belt, had just detected something. A massive energy signature, far larger than the one that had destroyed the Peacekeeper fleet, was coalescing just outside the system. It was moving slowly, deliberately, like a great predator circling its prey. "They know," Rex said, his voice grim. "We've blinded them, and now they're coming to crush the source of the interference. They're coming for us." He looked at the monitor showing Anya's vitals. Her body had gone still, but her mind was a raging inferno. She was holding the line, a single, fraying consciousness against an intergalactic horror. But she couldn't do it forever, and she couldn't fight their ships. Her null hymn was a shield, not a sword. All hands. Rex's voice boomed across the ship's comms, the first true call to arms humanity had heard in a millennium. "Activate the fleet. Bring the platforms online. Slave their targeting systems to my command. We are the Shield Fleet. We were born for this day." He turned to Sergeant Thorn. "Get your men suited up. The war isn't coming anymore. Sergeant, it's here, and we are going to meet it." The 200 silent, sleeping warships of the Shield Fleet began to stir in the cold darkness, their ancient reactors warming, their weapon ports sliding open like waking eyes. The long quiet had ended with a whisper. Now, the long war would begin with a roar. The void between the worlds went from empty to occupied in the space of a single, silent heartbeat. One moment, the shield fleet faced the familiar, indifferent blackness of the Oort cloud. The next, they faced the chorus. They were not ships in any human sense of the word. They were crystalline entities, vast, cathedral-like structures that seemed carved from frozen music. They did not burn with drive plasma or glint with reflected starlight. They pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, their geometric facets shifting and rearranging in a slow, hypnotic dance. There were hundreds of them, a fleet of impossible jewels arrayed in a perfect, harmonious spiral, and at their center was a vessel so immense it blotted out a swath of the Milky Way. It was not a flagship, it was a conductor's podium, and the silent concert was about to begin. The comms on the Iron Resolve remained silent. There was no declaration of war, no ultimatum. The chorus did not speak in words. It began to sing. This time, it was not a subtle, invasive whisper. It was a declaration, a wave of pure psychic dominance that washed over the fleet. But this time, it met a wall. From the core of the Iron Resolve, the null hymn roared out to meet it, a tidal wave of pure, weaponized chaos. It was the shriek of dying stars, the cacophony of a billion breaking minds, the antithesis of harmony. The two forces met in the space between the fleets, and the void itself seemed to recoil. There was no sound, but the crews of the shield fleet felt it as a nauseating lurch in reality, a moment of profound cosmic dissonance. On their view screens, space warped and shimmered as if seen through heated air. The chorus's psychic assault, the weapon that had silenced 30,000 souls without firing a shot, had been neutralized. But the silence that followed was the silence of a held breath before a killing blow. "They're blind to our minds." Rex's voice cut through the tension on the bridge, hard as diamond. "But not to our ships. All platforms, fire at will. Target the smaller structures first. Break their formation." The long war began with a volley of kinetic fury. 200 automated defense platforms, machines that had slept for a millennium, unleashed hell. Tungsten rods the size of shuttles, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light, tore through the vacuum. Swarms of plasma torpedoes, their warheads burning with the heat of miniature suns, painted streaks of incandescent rage against the black. It was a storm of primitive, brutal force, a relic of a forgotten age of warfare, and it slammed into the chorus's vanguard. The effect was not what they expected. The crystalline ships did not explode. Their facets flickered, their internal light swirled, and the kinetic rounds simply dissolved. Their momentum and mass dissipated into the resonant structure. The plasma torpedoes fared little better, their explosive energy absorbed and harmonized by the alien vessels, causing them to glow brighter, like a bell struck by a hammer. "No effect," the tactical officer yelled, his voice strained with disbelief. "Their resonant frequency is acting as a shield. Our weapons are being nullified." The chorus returned fire. Beams of coherent, shimmering energy, more like solid light than laser, lanced out from their structures. They didn't punch through hulls. They resonated with them. The UNS Valiant, an old destroyer, was struck by one of the beams. It didn't explode. It began to vibrate, the metal of its frame groaning as it was forced into an alien harmonic. Within seconds, the ship's structural integrity failed, and it simply disintegrated into a cloud of shimmering metal dust. its crew becoming motes in the starlight. Inside the resonance chamber, Anya was drowning. She was the shield. But the strain was unimaginable. The chorus was now focusing its song directly on the source of the null hymn, a concentrated psychic spear aimed at her mind. She felt her consciousness fraying. The individual memories and horrors she was using as fuel beginning to blur into a single, roaring inferno. She was no longer Anya Sharma, the librarian. She was becoming the archive itself, a disembodied vortex of human pain. She clung to a single, anchoring thought, the image of General Rex's face, his eyes filled with a cold, grim determination. He was the sword, and she had to remain the shield. On the bridge, Rex watched 3 more ships disintegrate. His strategy of brute force had failed. They couldn't outshoot an enemy they couldn't hit. But he saw something. One of the smaller chorus vessels, caught in a crossfire of plasma and kinetic rounds, had flickered erratically. At the same time, the feedback from Anya's chamber had spiked. There was a connection. The null hymn wasn't just a shield, it was a disruption. Her chaos was creating fleeting moments of dissonance in their perfect harmony, moments of vulnerability. They couldn't talk to her, not with a mind that was a raging storm, but they had to coordinate with her. Thorn. Rex barked at the sergeant who now stood at his side. Get to engineering. I want you to modulate the power output to the resonance chamber. Give me a rhythmic pulse, a simple repeating pattern, a heartbeat. Let's see if the storm can feel a drumbeat in its thunder. Anya felt it, amidst the swirling chaos of her own mind and the crushing pressure of the chorus's song. A new sensation emerged, a faint, rhythmic pulse throbbing through the very fabric of the chamber. Thump, 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 thump. It was not a sound, it was a sensation, a vibration of pure power. It was a heartbeat in the heart of the hurricane. It was Rex. He was talking to her in the only language that could cut through the noise, the language of a simple, steady rhythm. He wasn't telling her to hold. He was telling her to focus. She understood. The librarian, the archivist, took control of the storm. She stopped pouring the entirety of human history into the fire. She began to select her weapons. She reached into the depths of the dead ledgers and pulled out the cold, focused ambition of a Caesar crossing the Rubicon. She channeled the berserker rage of a Viking shield wall. She harnessed the terrifying, world-breaking calculus of the scientists who had first split the atom. She was no longer just broadcasting chaos. She was shaping it, focusing the specific, targeted insanities of her species into a coherent psychic weapon. The waveform of the null hymn on the bridge monitor changed. The jagged, random scribble began to coalesce into a complex, terrifying pattern, a weaponized symphony of human darkness. She aimed it at a single chorus vessel, the one that had just destroyed the UNS Defiance. The effect was absolute. The crystalline ship did not disintegrate or explode. Its internal light, once a soft, harmonious pulse, turned sick, discordant red. Its facets began to vibrate violently, cracking and shattering. It was as if its own song had turned against it. A beautiful melody twisted into a deafening shriek. The vessel turned on its nearest neighbor, firing its resonant beams in a frenzy of self-destruction before it imploded, collapsing in on itself into a point of silent, dead crystal. A cheer erupted on the bridge. They had a sword. All platforms. Rex's voice was ice. Follow her lead. Watch the hymn. Wherever she strikes, concentrate all fire. She'll crack them open. You break them apart. The battle for the Sol system turned into a brutal, bloody dance. Anya was the tip of the spear, her focused chaos smashing the harmonic defenses of the chorus ships, and the shield fleet followed in her wake, their primitive weapons now lethally effective. They fought for hours. A fleet of ghosts commanded by a librarian who had become a goddess of war. They lost ships. They lost hundreds of lives. But for every vessel they lost, the chorus lost 5. The great, harmonious spiral of the enemy fleet was broken. Their perfect music shattered into a panicked cacophony. Finally, the great central vessel, the conductor's podium, pulsed with a deep, mournful light. It turned, and without any signal that the humans could detect, the remnants of the chorus fleet disengaged, their crystalline forms dissolving back into the nothingness of warp space. They were not destroyed, but they were broken. They had come to a silent garden expecting to find a choir, and had instead found a banshee whose scream was louder than their song. They fled. In the aftermath, a profound silence descended, deeper than any that had come before. The war was over. The victory was absolute. Rex ordered a team to the core chamber. They found it empty. The resonance chair was cold. The neurolinks lay on the floor like severed nerves. Anya Sharma's physical body was gone, consumed entirely by the final and massive energy release. But the chamber was not silent. A low, soft hum emanated from the chair itself, a faint, chaotic static. The null hymn had not ceased. On the bridge monitor, the waveform was still there, no longer a raging storm, but a quiet, steady, complex murmur. She hadn't died. She had transcended. Anya Sharma, the keeper of humanity's ghosts, had become one herself. She was the archive, the shield, a permanent, sleepless guardian woven into the very fabric of the Sol system. Months later, General Kalen Rex stood before the Accord Council on Luna. The chamber was silent. The faces of the counselors a mixture of awe, gratitude, and a deep, abiding fear. Humanity had been saved, but the price had been the death of their 1,000-year dream. The wolf was awake now, and it could not be put back to sleep. Rex was no longer a relic. He was the commander of the most powerful fleet in the sector, the grim protector of a species that now knew the universe was not a garden, but a wilderness. He refused their medals and their accolades. His only request was that the shield fleet be granted sole custodianship of the Oort cloud, and that Archive Station Epsilon be moved into a permanent, synchronous orbit around the Iron Resolve. Later that year, Rex stood alone in the core chamber of his ship. The resonance chair, now enshrined behind a shielded case, hummed softly. It was her, the last and greatest entry in the dead ledgers. The probe's report movement in the Perseus Veil, he said to the empty room, his voice low. A different energy signature this time, not the chorus. He paused, his hand resting on the cold glass of the case. The stars are loud again. But we're listening. The hum from the chair seemed to shift, to deepen. A quiet, chaotic murmur that sounded, just for a moment, like a promise. The long quiet was over. The long watch had just begun. Humanity had found its strength not in peace or in perfection, but in the beautifully flawed, violent, and indomitable chaos of its own heart. And in the darkness between the stars, its guardian was waiting.